Welcome to another part of the Terrarium Elements series that I'm currently filming. This is the last part before I do the full tutorial on how to put all of them together. Now, I've already spoken about the essential bits that you need to get for your terrarium before you start adding in the plants. So the type of soil, the activated charcoal, the moss, the type of vessel that you're going to use, all of that kind of stuff. And today I'm going to talk through what is arguably the most important part of all, which is the plants themselves. I'm going to give you some tips on the best ones to use for both an open and a closed terrarium. I'm going to start by talking about a closed terrarium. So this could be a cork top jar that you have, it could be a bottle terrarium or a demijohn style, whatever type of vessel you have, as long as it's the closed style, these are the plants that are going to work best. I'm going to start off with a couple of classics which are very easy to find in most plant stores or online, and then I'm going to talk about a few which are a little bit more unusual but still work just as well, and then after that I'll talk about the types that are suitable for an open terrarium. The first plant that I can highly recommend for a terrarium, any type of closed terrarium, is one of these guys. So these are hypostes, otherwise known as a polka dot plant. They come in loads of different colours, as you can see. So we've got white, pink, and a brighter fuchsia pink or red, and they all are so lovely to use in terrariums because of the colour. They really stand out. They're quite slow growing and they do tend to stay quite short as long as you keep them trim, or as long as they're not in too much sunlight. They're very hardy, they're very easy to put into a terrarium. You can see the leaves are quite soft, so they will fit through even quite a narrow topped vessel, and they can be split. So by split, what I mean is you can pull them out of the pot, split them into 2 or 3 smaller plants, and then they can be used inside smaller vessels. So these are a really good option and very cheap to buy, easy to find. So that's a good start. The second plant is along a similar vein. Now these are called Fittonia, or otherwise known as a nerve plant, and you can see why they're known as a nerve plant because their leaves look like small nerves or veins running through the leaf. And they come in loads of different colours. These are just 3 basic ones that I've got. So sort of a green one with white veins, a very, very pale green with white veins, and then a dark green with pink veins. Now, similar to the hypostes, these guys are super hardy, they're quite slow growing, they're really beautiful and add a real pop of colour to a terrarium, easy to get hold of, cheap to buy. So definitely a good option, especially if you're a beginner, because they can come back from near death and still survive quite happily. The third plant is ivy. These are super easy to get hold of. You don't even need to go to a specialist plant shop to get hold of some of this. It grows so quickly, it will cover the sides and the floor of your terrarium. If you've got a big terrarium, this works exceptionally well. It's almost impossible to kill and it's super cheap to buy. So that is a really good starter plant if you're looking at making your first terrarium. The fourth option is ferns. Now ferns are what originally inspired terrariums back in the day when terrariums were first discovered, and that's another video, I'll talk about the history of them another day, but this was one of the first things that people used to go and dig up in the wild from woodland and other areas and fill their terrariums with ferns. This is particularly popular in London, which was kind of where terrariums first started to appear. And they come in all shapes and sizes. I've got 6 different types here, and all of these work so well in terrariums. They love the humidity, they love the moisture, they don't like being in full sunlight. So if you've got a slightly darker area where you're going to put your terrarium, these guys will love it. This is a tree maidenhair fern. I've got a staghorn fern, and these actually make really good mounted plants as well. So if you're doing some sort of display in your house, that's a good option. This one is a Korean rock fern, really pretty leaves. I love the shape of those, they're like the classic fern shape. This is a painted brake fern, all the way from Australia, and they have really unusual sort of burgundy tips to their leaves, which probably isn't showing too well on the video, but hopefully if you see one in real life you'll know what I mean. A Boston fern, otherwise known as a sword fern. These are super cheap, very, very hardy, easy to find, a good option for a starter. And then these, which are one of my personal favourites, this is a crocodile fern, and you can see why it's called a crocodile fern because of the unusual patterns on the leaves. So ferns are an absolutely brilliant option for your terrarium, and they will thrive. They absolutely love the humidity, they love being in the enclosed space, they don't grow very quickly, so they'll keep their shape and they certainly won't overtake your terrarium too fast. So I would highly recommend using these. They can just be a little bit harder to get hold of than the other 3 that I've already spoken about, but if you search or if you have a look on my website, I've always got these for sale. The fifth plant is this guy. Now you may recognise him if you've ever been abroad somewhere tropical. These are coffee plants, and again, because they love heat and they love humidity, they love terrariums and they thrive really, really well. You can actually see on this one the little coffee beans from where the plant has grown out of, and they are just so lush and lovely, and they add real structure to your terrarium because they do grow quite tall. And you never know, maybe one day you'll be able to make your own coffee. The great thing about these is they do split really easily. So I spoke a minute ago about splitting. I'm just going to show you this one as an example. So just pull your plant out of the pot, and you can see the different stems here in this particular plant. Now all I'm going to do is gently pull them apart, and you'll see you can give the soil a little bit of a squeeze if it feels a little bit tough, and you'll see that the plants simply come apart with their roots. So that's one little tiny coffee plant. Give it a bit of a wriggle. That's another little coffee plant. So if you've got a really small terrarium, you can use a little piece like this and that will plant straight in and grow quite happily. Or if you've got something bigger, you can stick to the main plant. So that's a good tip for generally when you're making terrariums, is to make sure that you split the plants that you have if they're too big. And then the other part that you don't use, obviously you can just pot that up and use it as a normal house plant. So don't let any of it go to waste. All these plants that I've chosen that are particularly good for terrariums are also perfectly good house plants. So if you do split plants and have a little bit left over, don't waste them. Keep them, pot them up, and then use them somewhere else in your house. Plant number 6 is a bromeliad. Now these also hail from more exotic areas than what we're used to, and they particularly love cloud forests. These guys actually don't generally grow on the ground, they grow in trees, and they're a favourite food of some very exotic animals. For example, the spectacled bear in Peru absolutely loves to eat these. And you may have seen on some of the wildlife programs that small frogs love to lay their eggs inside here because they actually have a little well of water right in the middle. So these are a really cool, really interesting plant. And again, because they come from a cloud forest, they absolutely love humidity. They love really damp areas, and that's what a closed terrarium is all about. So bromeliads are an excellent option, but you do need to have a fairly big terrarium because you can see they are quite wide and they're quite tough. The leaves are very thick, and for that reason you would need a fairly large hole in the top of your terrarium to be able to put it in, and then quite a wide vessel in itself to even be able to fit these plants. But if you do have a really big vessel, these are a brilliant option. They come in loads of different colours. This one is actually a blushing bromeliad. You can just see it's got a few, hopefully you can see on there, a few little pink bits starting to appear, and as they get bigger they get a little bit pinker, but they come in all kinds of colours. And there's a really beautiful dark green one which has got stripes. So yeah, that's another great option for a slightly larger style terrarium. If you're looking to add a pop of colour to your terrarium, it doesn't really get much better than these guys. They're called a star plant. And you can see why it's called a star plant, because they do come in a star shape. Now this one is pink and green. They also come in a really dark pink colour. They come in very pale pink. And they are just such a great pop of colour on the floor of your terrarium. They are also part of the bromeliad family, but they're much smaller and they grow really slowly. So if you've got a smaller vessel, these are a great option. They are also nice and low, so if you're trying to add layers into your terrarium, so perhaps low plants, mid plants and high plants, these would be a good option to pop on the floor, and they can survive quite happily without too much soil. So if you've got quite a shallow terrarium, they could be a really good option. Another great option for adding some vibrancy into your terrarium is a Tradescantia. They're also known as a wandering dew plant, and they come in lots of different colours. So this one's a striped one. You can see they come in deep purples, they come in bright purples, and they're very slow growing and very hardy. Now they do trail, so they're more of a trailing plant. So if you want them to be in your terrarium for the long term, they may not be the best option, but because they are so slow growing, they can quite happily sit in your terrarium for a few years before they get too big and would need to be removed. And then you can pop them in a pot and they'll trail over and they create a lovely display on, for example, a bookshelf. These are also a really good plant to propagate from. They propagate super easily. I've actually got a clipping from one that I gave to my sister-in-law, well, my sister-in-law to be, that she also gave a clipping to her mum, and her mum gave a clipping of it to somebody else, and it's gone on and on and on. So these plants have really good longevity. They're really pretty and super hardy. Very easy to get hold of from most normal plant shops. Again, I sell them on my website, so a good option and not too expensive. So now I'm going to talk about a few options that are a little bit harder to care for. Not super hard, but not quite as easy as the options I've already discussed. Number 1 is a Syngonium. Now these guys come in absolutely beautiful colours. They have lovely leaf shapes. You can see here they're also known as an arrowhead plant because of the leaf shape. This one's called a neon and it's pink, and this one's a pixie, and they are just so pretty and they look beautiful in terrariums, but they are a little bit more fussy. Not that should put you off ever getting some, because they're not super expensive to buy, but they do require certain levels of light that some people can't give them. Just be aware of that when buying. But if you're willing to take on a bit more of a project and if you're a bit more experienced, then these are a really good option. Another option, if you are a bit more experienced with your plants, is a begonia. They have absolutely stunning leaf varieties, really pretty patterns on here. This is just one example of many that you can get. They actually have, you probably can't see on here, they do have like an iridescent sheen on the leaf, which is stunning. So they are excellent because they love a really damp, humid environment. They're perfect for a terrarium, but they are not the easiest plants. They're not like a Photonia or a Hypostes where you can sort of shove them in and they'll get on with it. They can be a little bit more fussy than that. But if you are a bit more experienced with plants, then these are a great option. A little bit more on the pricey side, but I would say worth it because of the beautiful colours that you can get. Next up is this guy. This is a bloodleaf. Now you can see why it's called a bloodleaf, because they're dark red with bright pink veins. They're really pretty, they add such a lovely colour to your terrarium and real depth, but they are quite hard to get hold of, and they can be a little bit fussy with the soil type that you put them in. But if you do a little bit of research online to these guys, then you should be able to keep them happy, and they do work really, really well when you pop them in with a taller plant because they do stay quite low to the ground. Now finally, if you're looking to make your terrarium almost like a forest and add in some plants that do replicate trees, there's quite a few options that you can have, but two that I've got here are a parlour palm. Now again, these split really easily and you can take each individual one off and just put one or two into a terrarium, and they do look like miniature palm trees. They are a palm, but they look like a miniature tree. They're very, very slow growing, very hardy. They'll be happy in any type of closed terrarium as long as they've got enough height, and they do add a real jungle feel to your terrarium. So if you're looking to make it quite a jungly, exotic looking terrarium, these are a fantastic option. Cheap to buy, easy to find, and a really nice structural plant. Second up is a cane plant. Now I've got this really beautiful variegated variety which I just love. I was going to sell this one, but I ended up keeping it for myself because I love the colour of the leaves too much, and you can see quite easily why these would add a forest-like feel to a terrarium, because they have this lovely big woody stalk with the smaller veins coming off with the leaves, and they do literally look like miniature trees. They come in spotted leaves, plain leaves, dark green, light green, yellows, all sorts. If you're looking to make your terrarium more like a landscape, these are fantastic. So that kind of sums up some of the best plants for a closed terrarium. Now that is by no means an exhaustive list. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plants that you can put into a closed terrarium. Pretty much any plant will work in a closed terrarium with the exception of cacti and succulents, which I have spoken about before. If you've watched the video on the type of vessel that you're going to choose, I explain in that why you can't use cacti and succulents in closed terrariums. But other plants all work really, really well in closed terrariums. So they're just a few of my favourites and ones that are fairly easy to get hold of, and colourful ones, which I think it's nice to add colour into a terrarium. An open terrarium will always be full of lots of different cacti and succulents, and that is what governs the main difference between open and closed, is that cacti and succulents do not like being in a closed terrarium because it has lots of humidity, and we all know that most cacti and succulents, 99% of them, come from deserty, dry, arid regions, and therefore they do not like humidity, hence why you shouldn't keep them in your bathroom or overwater them. One of the biggest causes of deaths of cacti and succulents is overwatering. So with that in mind, if you're making an open terrarium with cacti and succulents, you can use any type of cacti or succulent. It doesn't matter what type you use. They all have very similar needs. For example, they don't need to be watered very often. They like a really nice bright spot with plenty of sunshine, and they can pretty much be left to their own devices without too much interaction. Now, if you go to a regular garden centre, the chances are that their types of cacti and succulent that they're going to have available for you to buy are going to be pretty limited. You'll probably see lots of this style of succulent, which is the type that are everywhere at the moment. They're super popular, really cheap to buy, very easy to get hold of, and they do work perfectly well in an open terrarium, of course, because they are a succulent. However, nowadays it is possible to get so many different types of lovely succulents that are really unusual, or cacti. I'm just going to show you a few here of my favourites. So I've got this guy. It's a baseball plant. It's really cool to look at, works perfectly well in an open terrarium. This one is an old lady of Peru, and they are actually furry. They do have spikes underneath, so don't touch them too hard, but they are beautifully soft and furry on the outside. So it's another very unusual type of cactus. The classic aloe vera doesn't have to be the normal green that you can see. You can get them in this beautiful spiky blue colour with the slightly thinner leaves. You can even get teeny tiny cactus that are absolutely minuscule, like this one or this one. They're so tiny and they're super cute. So if you've got a smaller vessel, these guys work really, really well. This is a crassula, and it's called a Buddha's temple. This cactus is one of my absolute favourites because of the gorgeous purple colour. This is called a moonstone. It's a type of succulent. It's actually really heavy, but again, they require exactly the same care, so don't be scared of buying something that you don't recognise initially, because usually the care is very simple. And finally, this is a euphorbia, and one of my favourites because I love the colours on it. It's also known as an African milk tree, and they work exactly the same as all the rest of these plants, in the same care that they don't like too much water. They like lots of nice bright light, and they all thrive quite happily in open terrariums. So the options for an open terrarium is a little bit more simple than that of a closed terrarium, because generally you can pop all these plants in together and they'll just love it as long as they've got a nice sandy bottom, lots of drainage, lots of sunshine, and you don't overwater them. So it's much easier, and you can mix and match all these together. A closed terrarium can be a little bit more complicated because some plants don't like each other, but generally Any terrarium will work really well with most plants, open or closed. Just have a go at it. It's so satisfying. And if some of the plants die, don't worry. You can easily take them out and replace them and start again. You'll still have the vessel there ready to go. So my next video is going to be the full tutorial from start to finish of making the terrarium. I hope you join me there. That's the last one in this Terrarium Elements series, and then I'm going to start a new video series, this time on flowers.